teachers the position here. So, yay. And since Elaine's not here today, Jim is going to give us a note to sing the children out so that they can go downstairs for their worship and their program.
Go now in peace, go now in peace, may the Spirit of us surround you everywhere, everywhere, still to reign. Go now in peace, go now in peace, may the Spirit of us surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.
There it is. Once a month, we take an opportunity, we set aside the time to invite you to, if you choose to, light a candle, share a joy or a concern, although this morning, given that it's a new year, I also added a hope, a joy, a hope, or a concern for the time ahead. If you would like to light a candle, please line up here and come forward. You can light it silently, or you can say just a few words. If you do decide to say a few words, please tell us your name, because not everybody knows everyone, and I'd really appreciate it if you give your pronouns as well.
Happy New Year, everyone. I'm Leanne, in case I haven't met you personally. My dad passed Christmas morning. I had 4 parents throughout my life, and it's really hard because I would text him like crazy photos of my cats. It's just not a part of my life anymore. So I'm so glad I met you all last year, because I need love some experience with processing grief. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Carl Coons. I want to thank the congregation for all they've done for the Afghan family, the Wasserwalls. They've really thrived here. With this election, we're all very concerned for them in terms of what's happening. They have their green cards, but you just never know what's going to happen. We hope to get them settled here in another place. Luckily, the school has told us that they don't have to live in Duxbury. They can live nearby as long as it's local. So that gives us a great opportunity, assuming that the parsonage is not available, which we're all assuming. So again, I just want to thank you for all your support, and we're probably still going to need it in the coming year.
My name is Sue Shade. My pronouns are she and her, and I light this candle for a good friend whose husband passed away a week before Christmas. And I know she's struggling to figure out what's next and grieving in her own way.
Good morning. My name is Joy Sawyer. My pronouns are she and her. A month ago, I would have thought that I would be up here lighting a candle of sorrow. A dear friend of mine whose great-granddaughter just had her first baby at 27 weeks a month ago. Baby Caroline came weighing in at 1 pound, 2 ounces, I'm sorry. Just got a picture of her yesterday at 2 pounds, 2 ounces at a month old, so she's doing fine. So this is a candle of joy.
Then would you light one candle for all the joys, hopes, and concerns that go unspoken this morning, but that we carry in our hearts?
So the reading is Ministry is All That We Do by Gordon B. McKeeman. Now, McKeeman was a beloved Universalist who served, among other roles, as president of the Starr King School for Ministry in Berkeley, California. Ministry is all that we do together. Ministry is that quality of being in community that affirms dignity, beckons forth hidden possibilities, invites us into deeper, more constant, reverent relationships, and carries forward our heritage of hope and liberation. Ministry is what we do together as we celebrate triumphs of our human spirit, miracles of birth and life, wonders of devotion and sacrifice. Ministry is what we do together with one another, in terror and torment, in grief, in misery and pain, enabling us in the presence of death to say yes to life. We who minister speak and live the best we know with full knowledge that it is never quite enough, and yet are reassured by lostness found, fragments reunited, wounds healed, and joy shared. Ministry is what we all do together. That comes from Awakened from the Forest, Meditations on Ministry.
Would you join, please, in a spirit of prayer, meditation, attention? Spirit of life and love, who draws us together in a web of holy relationships. Make your presence known with us and in us and among us. Remind us that we are not alone in history. Ignite us with the courage of the living tradition. Remind us that we are not alone in entering the future. Anchor us with patience and perseverance. Remind us that we are not alone in our times of grief and pain. Comfort us with your Spirit, manifest in human hands and voices. Remind us that we are not alone in joy and wonder. Inspire us to honor and extend the beauty that we find in this world. Divine music of the universe, let our hearts beat in diverse and harmonious rhythms, cooperating with an everlasting dance of love. May we move with rhythms of peace. May we move with rhythms of compassion. May we move with rhythms of justice. Source of stars and planets and water and land, open our hearts to all of our neighbors. Open our souls to a renewal of faith. Open our hearts to join together in the work ahead. And now let us hold ourselves with open hearts in a moment of sacred silence. May our hopes and dreams take flight on the wings of love. Amen. Blessed be. And the words of the prayer today were by colleague Lynn Cox. We just came through a season of giving, although of course every season, every day is a time of giving. All of us give from our hearts, from our resources, from our efforts, our patience. But as we enter this new year, and as we look at a time of transition and change, not only in our country, but in our congregation as well, what I would ask you to give as fully as you can, as generously as you can, is your trust. Your trust in this faith, your trust in one another, your trust that together we find our way on the path. And as we do that, and as we enter into a world that I know is looking pretty fearsome at times, it is so important that we be strong. It's so important that we be strong as a congregation and in the ministries we do, and to that end, would you please support this congregation as generously as you can. The morning offering will now be gratefully received.
Our responsive reading is called Stand by This Faith. You will find it in your gray hymnal, number 569. And while you're finding that, let me tell you a bit about the author, Olympia Brown. In 1853, Olympia Brown was the first American woman ordained to ministry with the support of her denomination, the Universalist Church of America. A congregation in Racine, Wisconsin, which she helped to grow significantly, is still keeping the faith today. Has everyone found that? Number 569 in the gray hymnal? Great. Please respond to me with the italicized sections. Stand by this faith, work for it, and sacrifice for it. Which has comforted us in sorrow, strengthened us for noble duty, and made the world beautiful. That you are strong enough to work for a great true principle without counting the cost.
When I arrived for the first service in my first ministry, it was to a bank in downtown Macon, Georgia. That Sunday morning, I spoke to the guard, boarded the elevator, and rode to the basement, which mostly consisted of a big meeting room lit by fluorescent bulbs, a few plastic chairs, and a couple of tables. The one closet shelf designated for use by the fellowship held a small chalice and a few religious education materials, and a boombox for music. Someone see if Ed needs oxygen at the thought of a boombox. The worship was fairly typical until the end, and I may have mentioned this part before, when the service time came for the talk back. Each week after the sermon, as minister, I was expected to invite comments on what I had offered. And usually no one said much of anything, and then inevitably, up popped Judge Jerry to give the word on the topic of the day, and sometimes a critique of my sermon. He once asked whether I planned every gesture that I made while preaching. Nope. I said, for better or worse, flailing my limbs around comes naturally. Sitting here in this beautiful old building with its rich history, your fine musical instruments, all the space that you need, and a long tradition of ministry and dignified worship, you might imagine that gathering a little sadly. And I must admit, when studying for ministry, I did not expect to serve a congregation in the bowels of a financial institution. The worship service I dreamed of leading was not in a windowless, ill-lit room, nor did it include a grilling about my sermon. But expectations exist in part to be upended. Now, in the search process that you've been going through for your next minister, you've been asked to speak up on what you want and expect in a minister. And believe me, your search committee has the list, right? We talk much less about the fact that ministers have expectations of congregations as well. Ask a group of ministers in search what they want in a congregation, and I guarantee you they will be ready with some things to say. They might say a congregation that truly embraces shared ministry between itself and its professionals. Ministry is, as Bucky McKeeman wrote, all that we do together. They might say a congregation with the courage to live its values, willing to take a stand for justice, and also willing to put boundaries on bad behavior within its own walls to protect itself from chaos. A congregation in which people are kind to each other, but also willing to deal openly with differences and conflicts. A congregation that treats its staff well and justly is a big one for ministers. I could go on, but you get the idea. Ministers, congregations, we all have great expectations as we enter into this often joyous, sometimes frustrating, and ever surprising business of trying to live meaningfully and lovingly together in community toward a larger purpose. But expectations can be tricky, and they can even distract us from the love and connection that are possible. Just this past week, writer and spiritual seeker Anne Lamott wrote in a new piece that was in the Post or the Times, I have heard it said in the recovery community that expectations are resentments under construction. Isn't it so true? If you expect a partner or a parent or a child or a friend to do a particular thing, sometimes just by reading your mind, to react in a particular way, to celebrate Valentine's in a particular way, and they don't, the resentment starts to build up in layers. A recent advice column featured a letter from a writer whose friend expects all of her friends to remember the anniversary of her mother's death many years ago and reach out to her at a certain time in a certain way. And the friends have tried to meet this expectation for years, but they can't always do so. They're human. Their lives take on a momentum of their own. And if they don't, the woman grows very resentful. Is it a reasonable expectation, the writer wanted to know? The answer, by the way, was no. When it comes to ministry, expectations are important. They're important. But they can also be burdensome. The key, I think, after years particularly of doing interim ministry, is to have both very high expectations and realistic expectations, and to know in which realm each belongs. When it comes to the many roles and functions of ministers, don't expect perfection. When I started out in ministry a very long time ago, ministers were largely expected to preach and lead worship, to teach, and to do pastoral care. Over the years, our roles have expanded to include administration, organizational development, fundraising, human resources expertise, emergency management for safe congregations, and more. Virtually no minister and no human being will be great at all of those jobs. And the roles themselves are sometimes in conflict with one another. Being a compassionate pastor can be in conflict with being a responsible supervisor who holds people accountable. So it's important to know which are most important to your congregation and to be willing then to build systems that compensate for others effectively. That's the way all systems do it, and that's the way all effective ministries work. Think about it from your own experience. Whether you're a full-time parent, a teacher, a student, a soldier, a nurse, an athlete, a volunteer, you know you cannot do well everything that everybody expects and wants you to do. Yet you can still be incredibly gifted, highly effective, and valuable in what you offer. What we don't want ever is for expectations to make it impossible to do the work, whether it's of professional ministry or of congregational leadership, of any other thing that you try to do in life. Reasonable expectations. And at the same time, this is ministry. And you have the right to high expectations when it comes to service in the nature of what it is that we're about here. You are right to expect ministers to serve with personal integrity and follow our common code of ethics, to exercise kindness and compassion, to be willing to forgive and to elicit goodwill, even as we, the ministers, set personal boundaries we hope you will respect. You can expect us to be able to accept responsibility and apologize, not for everything that goes wrong, but when the mistake or harm is truly ours. Why should we not be able to? Because you see, those things that our highest expectations are centered around aren't skills or talents per se. I mean, they may involve some of that, and you may be able to learn some of it. But what they are essential commitments to healthy, covenanted relationship. And if you hear me say nothing else today, please hear this. Ministry is, above all, about relationship. It's about trust that has to go two ways. You must be able to trust a minister to have the integrity and honesty that you need, and to hold the whole collective congregation's well-being as the highest priority. In turn, a minister must be able to trust you to understand that the ministry of a church is the work of more than any one person. As Bucky McKeeman writes, it's what we all do together. And a minister is there in part to elicit from you the dedication, the commitment, the inspiration to do ministry. Also, a minister has to trust you to know that the congregation's health is about much more than any one person's opinion about a minister. Building that trust, that respect, that ability to communicate, that will be the most important and the most necessary thing that you and your minister do next year. And as someone who's been doing ministry for a long time, I can tell you from the bottom of my heart as a minister that the relationships we create are a privilege and a wonder. But so is faith. And I know that faith is a word some of you don't like, but faith is not believing literally in broken myths or in what you can't see or know. It's trusting what you consider ultimate in this life. And perhaps that's the capacity of human beings to love, to rise above the worst in our nature and realize the best. Maybe it's the power of redemption and healing when things are broken between people. Or the ability of the universe to surprise and amaze us because it does. Or the healing, nurturing necessity of community. Maybe that's what your faith is in. But faith is trusting in something so powerful and so important that you cannot resist the call to serve it. So yes, expect your minister to serve something greater even than this one congregation out of a sense of call. A minister cannot be just a people pleaser, just an employee, just someone building a career. It will not do. No one, none of us, is perfect at dwelling in our best selves all the time. Everyone has doubts and moments of cynicism and flights of ego, let's admit it. But if we truly feel called to serve the highest or deepest in human life together, the call must be at the center of what we do. And I guess in part, what I'm saying or offering up for you to consider is that a minister is not a CEO or a COO or a psychologist or a building manager or an event planner. A minister is a spiritual leader and companion. Colleague Mark Morrison Reed writes about it this way in reference to the congregation in which he came of age, Unitarian Universalist congregation. I am at home among these people in this liberal religious movement. It's a place where I was nurtured, and because I was nurtured, I grew. Having grown, I could give, and having given, I grew more. It is a place where struggling, I could fail, where failing, I was still loved, where loved, I could begin again. It is a place where in pain I could go, where having gone, I was cared for, where cared for, I could heal and go on. That is why I am a minister, to help sustain religious communities, places like the one in which I grew up, places made holy by what people experience within them, the seasons of their lives and the healing of their souls. The power of community is enormous, he writes, and I have lived my entire life in its embrace. It is why I entered ministry. I believe the liberal church is worth devoting a life to, my life. in fact. I only served that small congregation in Macon for a couple of years, but its people taught me how incomplete expectations and first impressions can be. There is probably no congregation that I remember more tenderly or with such pride in them. Those folks, think about it, had no building, no full-time minister, no endowment, no rental income, no heritage of local forebears, no long-standing reputation to ease the path in the community, but they were determined to have a congregation of progressive Unitarian Universalist faith in a small conservative city in the Deep South. At the end of my time there, they bought an old Methodist church in town and secured with the UUA support a full-time extension ministry. And they had done it out of sheer courage in the rich connections to one another, so caring of each other, and to those allies beyond their town who would help, including those of us who served as part-time ministers as we could along the way. They were special. Louise, Pat, Dorner, Carolyn, Bob, even cranky Jerry, and so many others, they inspire me still. In all that mattered, including their love of bonding with ministers, they exceeded my expectations for people of faith. So may your next minister exceed your expectations and you theirs. From this day forward now, in this year, let us bless the relationship of trust and care that awaits your creation in the days and months to come. Blessed be. I invite you to rise in body and spirit and join in singing hymn number 296, Wait Now, My Senses. for extinguishing the chalice as Caroline puts the flame out. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. In the name of all that is holy, may the connections between us inspire and sustain us. May the flame of life within us and amongst us be a sacred reminder that we are all called to serve, to grow, and to love as we continue this journey of transformation. Amen. The words of Kent McCusick.